Okay, so we are going to learn an excerpt of a Sicha from Shabbos Parshas Pinchas, Tavshin Memtes, and in that Kviyas, Shabbos Parshas Pinchas came out on Yud Tes Tamuz. Yud Tes Tamuz is the day of the bris of the Frierdiker Rebbe. As we know, the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday was Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th of Tammuz, Tov Reish Mem, 1880. So his bris was 8 days later. 8 days later, from Yud Beis Tammuz came out to be on Yud Tes Tammuz, on the 19th of Tammuz. That is yesterday on our calendar. And the Rebbe is going to explain that this is the idea of having a bris in middle of the Bein HaMitzarim, that even though the Bein HaMitzarim is a time of sadness and it's a time of, commemoration of something having to do with negativity and destruction, and Bris is a joyous occasion, especially in retrospect, that the Bris is a Bris of a Nasi B'Yisrael, that has to do with the whole entire Klal Yisrael. So therefore, there is the idea of bringing simchas into the Bein HaMitzarim. The Rebbe actually, in a different year, I think it was Tavshin Memhei, spoke about doing whatever we can in a kosher way on Yud Tes Tammuz, since it's the bris of the Frierdiker Rebbe, to bring in joyous occasions on that date especially, even though it's the middle of the 3 weeks, by having brisen and pidyon abens, etc. It's very interesting because a bris and a pidyon aben is not up to the person really. They're going to have it if they were born X amount of days beforehand. But those were, I think, if I remember correctly, the examples that the Rebbe brought. Anyway, let's get to the Sicha itself. Yud Tes Tammuz. The 19th of Tamuz is Yom Knisas Kvaytushis Meirech Admur Lebrisa Shel Avram Avinu Al Vashalom Mishnas Tov Reish Mem. That's the day when my father-in-law, in other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe, entered the covenant of Avram Avinu Al Vashalom in the year Tov Reish Mem, 1880. Hu Ma'yomim Harishonim Shebeshloisha Shavuos the Bein HaMitzarim. It's one of the first days, almost the beginning of the 3 weeks, known also in Lashon Kodesh as Bein HaMitzarim. Shiv also b'Tamuz HaTisha B'Av. The 3 weeks of Bein HaMitzarim begins on the 17th of Tammuz, and it concludes on the 9th of Av. So in other words, 2 days later, 2 days into the 3 weeks, we right away do something and have something that is not in concert with what the 3 weeks is about. We have days of rejoicing. Since everything is by divine providence, Allah has come how much more so our matters are connected with a leader amongst the Eden. For sure, this is something that is by divine providence and direction. It's understood that there's a reason, and it's exact in the fact that the bris began specifically at the beginning of the 3 weeks. Vadgashi Yisayda, and even more emphasized, Kivin Sheyem Ledis. Ubishonim Shalachar Zayem Agula Shloy B'Yud Beis Tammuz Lifnei Yom the Bein HaMitzarim. It's even more emphasized. He was born not in middle of the 3 weeks, and in the following years, what happened? His Chag Agula was also before the 3 weeks, but it came out in such a way where it was just the right time, that even though he was born before the 3 weeks, but the bris is going to take place during the 3 weeks. Since it's a day of the bris of a nasi amongst Yidden, had a movement Shazel Gam in Klolish and again L'chol Bnei Yisrael, but there is understood that this is also a general idea that matters to all people in this generation, because since the generation is the Nasi, and he is the Nasi of our generation, way that I've always put it, the Frierdiker Rebbe is our Nasi. So therefore, it's like every single Yid's own bris, his day of rejoicing. Al Pisa Dorish has, but according to this needs explanation. What is the content of a bris? Asher Kshurim Simcha Gedoyel, it's connected with a great joy. And the Rebbe brings in the footnote that it says, Sasa Noichal Imersecha Kemoitzel Shal Rov, that pasuk in Tillim, where David HaMelech says, I have rejoiced upon your sayings, meaning your commandments, like finding a great treasure. So this is talking about the joy of Milah. We also find that it says like Hudim V'Simcha V'Sasim Vikar V'Sasin. It says that's going on Bris Milah, just like David HaMelech said, Sasan Noichel Mersecha. Sasan is from the same root. And every single Bris Milah, the Rebbe says, we emphasize the joy that you make a meal, a Sudas Mitzvah, and they actually say the pasuk Sasan Noichel Mersecha. And the pasuk Yismach Avicha Veimecha V'Tagel Aratecha. We say after the milah, we say psukim that have to do with joy. So we see that a bris milah is completely connected with the idea of joy. So the Rebbe says 5 lines in the bottom of the first column. The joy and the idea of a bris milah that's connected with joy is the total opposite of the time of the 3 weeks. Zman Avelis Eitzel B'nai Yisrael. At the time of Avelis, the time of mourning amongst Klal Yisrael. That in those times we don't, during the 3 weeks, we don't make any types of rejoicing, weddings and so on. Because there are negative occurrences and events that occurred to the Jewish nation in these days. And primarily, what were the negative things that occurred? Churban Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, which began the process of the destruction, started with Shivas Tamuz. The destruction of Beis Hamikdash was the beginning of this very bitter galus that we're going through now. So it seems to be incongruous to have these two things together, a bris of a nasi b'Yisrael, meaning connected to all Klal Yisrael, at the same time where the beginning of the day's marking of such a sad time in Jewish history. So the Rebbe says in Beis, Abir Bezad explanation this is, concerning the idea of the time of the 3 weeks, where he spoke many times, though these days are connected with the greatest descent. Dvarim built it to very negative things that occurred then. But the purpose and intention of this descent is tzorech aliyas, for the sake of an ascent. To reach to a place and level higher, much higher than it was initially before the descent. We're not trying to return to the situation that we were there before the destruction. We're trying, and we are through the descent going to reach a level that's beyond what we were at before the descent. Like the great quality of light that comes out of darkness, which is much more powerful than the light that has not been challenged by darkness. This greater light and this greater ascent is revealed through the transformation of darkness to light. That is why Chassidus explains the light that comes out of darkness is much more powerful, because it has the greater power of the darkness to fuel the light, because it's being transformed. Similar to Baal Tshuva, that says the Baal Tshuva is greater than Tzaddikim. Baal Tshuva has even his dainus, even his intentional sins that become like zachis, like mitzvahs. It's the same idea of the darkness turning to light, and the same thing, the descent of Golus is adding to the ascent and the revelation that will be after the Golus is over, until the ascent of the true and complete redemption, a redemption that has no Golus following it. And like the Rebbe points out in the footnote, that it's an everlasting Geula. the Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry. In the footnote, he pointed out that the Beis Hamikdash, building the Beis Hamikdash, can be an everlasting building. L'maylam hamatzav shahoyu b'bayis rishon v'sheni, higher than the state that was in the first and second Beis Hamikdash koydem hayirida, before the descent, that they weren't buildings that would stand forever. Whereas the third Beis Hamikdash is something that will stand forever. That already indicates that it's an ascent that's greater than a descent. This ascent and this greater geula, that's greater than any other state that we were in before, even before the destruction, comes as a result and as an outcome, sha'helam va'hester da'agolus, the concealment and the covering of the exile, ma'oirer his gabrus ba'avoida, awakens and inspires the stronger type of service. Ma'aseinu avad yaseinu she'yehudi, our actions in the service of a yid, greater than it was before the descent. Asher mevias hagula, such a greater type of avoida, such a stronger type of avoida, that the darkness of exile evokes by us, brings about specifically such a greater ascent of the geula. V'yisedim is even more so. It doesn't, not only is the intention of the 3 weeks and the Golus in general for the sake of an elevation. It's like the Kol Mad Ovid Rachmanu Letav Ovid that the Rebbe always explains. Letav Ovid means there's something negative now. Everything Hashem does is for the good and it will result in good. But rather it's like Gamzu Latoiva. This itself is good. The inner and true meaning of these days, of the 3 weeks and so on, hu toiv naila b'yoser, is a great and unbelievable elevation, a goodness. Ha'aliyah shebazeh, the inner idea of these days is the ascent, not the descent. The descent is only something that's visible to us, but really it's something that is hiding in it and concealing in it the great ascent of the Geula in these particular days. So he goes on top of the next page. This is also what we say concerning the different fast days. The fast days as well, even though externally they're days of mourning and we're fasting, etc., the inner meaning of a fast day is a very elevated thing. So he says that in the brackets, like that is concerning the fast. That's at the beginning and the conclusion of the 3 weeks. The beginning of the 3 weeks is Shivasa Tamuz, and the conclusion of the 3 weeks is Tisha B'Av. And the truth is, this idea that the Rebbe is saying about the fast days applies to Vadal Datzomis B'chlal. It applies to the 4 fasts that are associated with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, beginning from the 10th of Teves, the time of the siege, and concluding with the assassination of Gedaliah ben Achikam. That's on the day after Rosh Hashanah. So all those 4 fast days that have to do with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So even though externally there are days of mourning and sadness, and that's why we're fasting, still in all, internally, their inner meaning is like it's called in Tanakh, it's a fast day is a day of appeasement and will by Hashem. That this is something that Hashem has a time of wanting Klal Yisrael and wanting the Yidden's avodah. The fast day is an expression of Hashem's great love to the Jewish people. But it's not visible at present. At present, the fast days are times that we are in a more low-key way. It's not a day of celebration, but the celebration will come when that inner part will become revealed. Therefore, in the future, speedily, these days will actually become transformed, like the Pasuk says, to days of rejoicing and happiness and to Yom Tovim. It's not just that once the Mashiach comes, there'll be no reason to fast for the morning of the Beis Hamikdash. No, that we don't have. It's not just we're not mourning the destruction, but we're celebrating. Why are we celebrating? What's the celebration about? Because the celebration is to mark that love that Hashem has for us that was always there in the fast day, but not revealed until Mashiach comes. Because really, even from the beginning, their inner content and meaning of all these fast days is the great love of Hashem for us. So that's the point concerning the fast days specifically. But the Rebbe says this also concerning the whole idea of Golus, and therefore the Bein HaMitzarim, the time of the 3 weeks. All of it is, just like the fast days, that it's not just for the sake of a goodness that will come about and result later on, for the greater ascent and elevation that will result from the descent of Golus, but it's hidden and embedded in those negative occurrences and that negative events is hidden the deeper meaning of the greater ascent. Ella, but despite that, second paragraph on the page, present, the goodness of the 3 weeks is now concealed and covered. Love will become revealed when Mashiach comes. Because Hashem wants that this revelation of this greater ascent that is caused by the descent should come about through the avodah of Yidden. He wants us to work for it. Ma'aseinu, avodaseinu, our actions and our service, lezacheches ha'olam, to refine the world, to purify the world, lasoise keli lekabos ha'tov ha'chinala, and to make the world into a vessel to be able to receive the greatest, most possible good, which is going to be the good of Mashiach's times. And by our avodah, shaydei mizgala ha'tov shel bein ha'mitzarim va'agolos, through our avodah becomes revealed the good that is embedded and concealed within the 3 weeks, and the good that's concealed and embedded within the Golus. How do we reveal the good in Golus? By inserting in the word Goyla for Golus, the Aleph of the Master of the world, and turning Goyla by adding the Aleph into Geula, like we've learned many times. Ha'aliyah shaloi ba'erech, the incomparable ascent in comparison even to our state of situation before our descent, shalagula mitzvah shleim, of the true and complete redemption, she'ein achra galus, that no galus follows it, v'shahelim shalifnei zeh rak harchona v'achshara legeula, and the concealment that was taking place beforehand was not a real concealment, only a preparation for the redemption. And the Rebbe brings from Maimer with Tzemach Tzedek explaining Megillas Eicha that there are many things that Chassidus takes from the negative. For example, in the Toichacha and the rebuke psukim in Chumash, and the same thing in Megillas Eicha. So there's psukim that the Tzemach Tzedek explains which seem negative into the positive. So he says, "Kafish mevayer hat Tzemach Tzedek as a pasuk Megillas Eicha." Like the Tzemach Tzedek explains the pasuk in Megillas Eicha, "Sigua bein hamitzarim," that they caught up to her, the goyim caught up to the Yidden amongst and between the narrow straits, and usually that's a negative thing. They caught up and they were able to attack him and so on. They weren't able to escape their oppressors, and the Tzemach Tzedek explains this pasuk l'shevach, that in a praiseworthy manner, in a positive manner. How come? Why does he explain it that way? Mitzad pnimius hatoiv sheyashem b'zeh, because there's, in every negative of the Golus, there is the inner good that's in it. Meaning, the Tzemach Tzedek explains, Shaydei avodas b'nei Yisrael b'meitzah shalamata, through the service of the Yidden, in the constraints and restrictions down here below. Ad l'meitzah Golus, until the constraints and constrictions of the time of Golus. And the Rebbe brings down that the person is in a very great bitter state from being so far from Hashem, and he reaches a higher level of tshuva through this, and he also thinks into how the worlds are very narrow and confined compared to Hashem. So all these things create by him a yearning towards Hashem, which is the word Bein HaMetzarim that it says over there in the pasuk Kipshute, literally constraints and literally restrictions. So then, because of that constraints of our constraints down here, Nimshach Melmaila Min HaMeitzar Elyon Deleis Machshava Tfisa Beklal, comes out the level from the supernal constraints. In other words, how Hashem is completely beyond everything, that no thought can grasp him. That's why it's called constraints. That's what it means Bein HaMetzarim in the plural. From my Meitzar, from my feeling constrained, from my tshuva and so on, I reach to Hashem's level where Hashem is like restricted and elevated and removed. Like the pasuk explains or says, from the narrowness and straits, I've called out to Hashem, respond to me in the broadness, Hashem, meaning that the first leads to the second. Only through that from the constraints I called out to Yudke Nasa on Nani B'merchav Yudke came that I responded in the broadness of Yudke from the great broadness of above, which is even higher than the level of the constraints of the top. But actually, I'm sorry, I was wrong. The Rebbe in footnote 23 says that there is this higher level of constraints that we said before is higher than Hashem's broadness. And because it's higher than it, it can force that Hashem's broadness should come out and respond to our Min HaMeitzar. Anyway, in other words, there's Bein HaMetzarim, there's my level of Meitzar and Hashem's Meitzar, and that Meitzar of Hashem, that constraints of Hashem, pushes out that it should be Anoni B'merchav Ka, that Hashem's broad power and his expansiveness and givingness and chesed should become revealed. So he says in the last paragraph on this page, "V'tekiv kishiyeshes akarasi nasa anoni." Immediately from and after we call, Hashem right away responds. Like the pasuk, it comes in one immediately after the other. Min hameitz akarasi yudki kei anoni b'merchav yudkei. So, and the Rebbe says even more so in the brackets, even more so, sheterem yikrov ani ena. There's a level that before even I call, before they even call, Hashem will respond to their requests. And then the Rebbe adds in the footnotes, since the inner aspect of every Yeridam is for the sake of the ascent, so immediately, in the moment of destruction, Mashiach was born. Even before the Avodah and the calling of the Yidden, similar to what we just now said in the pasuk, Terem Yikro Aniyana. And that's also the reason the Rebbe says in the bottom of the page, the asterisk on this footnote, the Rebbe brings a very geschmack word. He says that when the Goyim went into the Heichel, they saw the Kruvim that were on top of the Aron. When they went into the Kodesh Kadosh, they saw the Kruvim embracing each other. That we know that when Hashem was upset with the Yidden, so then the Kruvim on top of the Aron were turned away from each other. But when Hashem was showing his love to the Yidden, so the embracing of the Kruvim was symbolic of Hashem's embrace of the Jewish people. So how is it possible that when the Goyim went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they completely and utterly destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the time of the greatest calamity for the Jewish people that led to all the negative things that took place afterwards, which should have been the time of Hashem's greatest anger with the Yidden. That's when the Kruvim were embracing each other, because internally, the inner meaning of the Golus and the exile and the destruction is really Hashem's love for us, and that was manifest in the Beis HaMikdash at the very moment of the destruction. In the same way, like we said, Mashiach was born in the very moment of destruction, Terem Yikrov Aniyan. 4 lines before the end of the page, Al Derech HaMavur, similar to what's explained in Benegel, at Kiyas Shofar B'Rosh Hashanah, concerning the blowing of Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, the Chazal say that it says Bereishis Hashanah vad Achris Hashanah. So it says Eretz she'eina Hashem Elokecha ba, Mei Reishis Hashana v'Dachs Hashana. Mei Reishis is spelled without an aleph, and it's related to the word Rosh, meaning poor. So the Chazal say a year that begins off in a way of being narrow and confined and poor will become rich at the end. So he says, Al derech, this is similar to Min Hameitzar Karasi Yudke Anani V'Merchav Yudke that we say. By the way, we also say this on Rosh Hashanah by before Tkiyas Shofar. The same idea. The Shofar itself has a type of Hareza Maschil B'Sofer the Tkiyas Shofar. So what it says over there is that it's brought down. The Rebbe says Al Derech Mavur in Mamorim. It says that just like the Minametz Karasi Ka Anani V'Merchav Ka begins with Tkiyas Shofar, so it means the Anani V'Merchav Ka, as soon as we blew the Shofar, boom. It doesn't mean a year that is poor at the beginning will eventually next Elul will be rich. No, the Rebbe Marash and other Mamorim explain. It means as soon as it's poor by Tkiyas Shofar, as soon as Tkiyas Shofar is over, boom, it's already starting to be rich. B'soif teikef achri Tkiyas Shofar b'tchilas Hashan, immediately after the blowing of the Shofar at the beginning of the year. And the Rebbe says in the brackets, b'dugma l'zeh, and similar to this, b'chol yom, every day, b'frat b'me'av mitzarim, especially in the days of the 3 weeks, shekol yom b'protis doima l'shana. In general, every day specifically, it's brought down that it's likened to a year. Shebishas hatfilah, during davening, nasa teikif karasi ka betchilas kol yom, when we call out Hashem at the beginning of every day. That's when we call out Hashem at the beginning of the day. We daven. Nasa teikif ha'inyan v'merchav ka teikif miyad, becomes the idea that He will answer me with broadness Yudke immediately. So here, this is all to bring out the point how any confines, any concealments, any idea of Bein HaMitzarim has in it embedded the goodness that will result afterwards. So it's good right now, not just later on. Gimel, Inyan Anal, this above mentioned idea, Gili Pnimius HaTov Bein HaMitzarim, the revelation of the inner goodness that's in the 3 weeks, Nimtza Begilui Gambas Manazed B'Shabbos Shebein HaMitzarim, is found in a revealed way, even these days, even before Mashiach comes, in the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks, Ki even Sha'oz like Hayomim Dine Aveils V'Tzar, because during the days of the 3 weeks, during the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks, we're not allowed to have any types of mourning and pain and suffering. Ke'ein eitzav ba, it says about Shabbos, there is no sadness in it. Its sadness is outlawed on Shabbos. Va'ad rabba mitzvah la'anga, it's a mitzvah to derive pleasure on Shabbos. Ba'oin achil v'shtiya, basar shamin v'yayin yoshin, with the delight of eating and drinking fatty meat and old wine. Ubiyam simchas chamel ha-Shabbosis, the Chazal say that when it says in the pasuk that the days of your rejoicing, this is going on Shabbos. Moving, it's understood that during Shabbos there's only the good and the elevation and the ascent of the 3 weeks. So in other words, we've said that the 3 weeks have goodness concealed in them, but on Shabbos the goodness is revealed. It's a time of rejoicing. Top of the next column, V'adraba, even more so, B'sheli Yoysa Shabbos V'bein HaMitzarim, since it's a Shabbos of the 3 weeks, when during the weekdays there's limitations in joy, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do during the 3 weeks, so therefore there is during Shabbos, and there has to be during Shabbos, there has to be a greater joy and greater delight during the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks, than in the other Shabbosim of the year. Why? Because you have the greater light that comes out of the darkness. This is even more so, the idea that the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks have to be even more joyful, according to the explanation of the inner meaning of Shabbosis, we know the Eibishter precedes the healing before the strike, before the illness. So the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks, which precede the terrible events of the 3 weeks a lot of times, and definitely it precedes Tisha B'Av, is like Hashem giving us the healing before the suffering of the 3 weeks. What is the idea of Magdim Refuah Maka? This indicates that in truth there was initially no affliction. Because the Shabbosim revealed the innermost idea of the exile. That what's the inner meaning of the exile? That's a preparation and a readying of the world for the redemption. This means that the Shabbos of the 3 weeks are not just beyond and above destruction and exile. Therefore, the laws of mourning do not apply on Shabbos. Even more so, the Shabbos' mission, their purpose in being during the 3 weeks, is it's to show us, to reveal to us what is the inner intention of the 3 weeks. That that these days, the days of the 3 weeks, will be transformed to rejoicing and happiness. And this is emphasized by the Shabbosim, where we actually see how days of the 3 weeks are days of rejoicing. So it's giving us a taste of and showing us the goal and the purpose of the 3 weeks by actually experiencing the joy in the middle of the 3 weeks. There's an interesting footnote over here in footnote 39, where the Rebbe spoke earlier, where he says, when it says in the pasuk, Ubiyem Simchaschem, in the day of your rejoicing, that's going on the Shabbosim, he says it's very interesting that it's called your rejoicing, because it's coming about through the service of a person, more so the rejoicing of that we say on Shvi Shel Pesach, that the halach is, or it's brought down as Kulei Lashem, or Simchaseinu, which is Zman Simchaseinu, is said on Sukkot. So the Rebbe says that shows our Simcha is not our as in Klal Yisrael, but our as in Hashem's rejoicing along with Klal Yisrael. So Simchaschem means, no, this is the joy that you are accomplishing. This is totally up to you. And this, the Rebbe says in that footnote, that this is even more emphasized in the Shabbos in between of the 3 weeks, because it's incumbent upon us to bring with greater service and greater toil in the avoid of a person to add in joy. So you shouldn't have any concern, chas v'sholem, chas v'chalila, that you might be sad on a Shabbos of the 3 weeks in a way that the additional light comes out of the darkness. There was a famous story about the Rebbe's father was once asked, when he was a Rav Yekaterinoslav, about someone whose custom was to wear slippers all week long, for whatever reason. He was more comfortable, his feet hurt, whatever it was. And there was a Shabbos either during the 3 weeks or during the 9 days, and he asked what to do. So the Rebbe Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father, said he has to wear normal shoes. He can't wear the slippers, because one who sees him might think he's doing something in mourning on Shabbos. So the same thing, in general, the Rebbe always says that Shabbos in between the 3 weeks, we have to bend over backwards to do more simcha. That's what it means, b'yom simchaschem. You need to add in the simcha of the 3 weeks, so that no one, chas v'sholem, will think that you are mourning somehow during the Shabbos of the 3 weeks, and it has to be in such a way like the extra light that comes out of the darkness. Let's go back to the text. We're holding the second paragraph from the end of the page, Ois Dalet. In a similar vein, we could say concerning the Frierdiker Rebbe's bris on the 19th of Tamuz, Yom Simcha Gedolah, day of a great rejoicing. She'ein ze inyan havchim bein hamitzarim. It's not the opposite. It's not contradictory to the bein hamitzarim, to the 3 weeks. Ela adra, but just the opposite. This itself is the true meaning of the 3 weeks. Because the inner meaning and the inner idea of the days of the 3 weeks is Yimei, Sasim, V'Simcha, Moedim, Tovim. These are days of rejoicing and happiness in Yom Tovim. Just technically, we have to wait till we finished our job to be able to celebrate and rejoice. While Pisa moving according to understood. The fact that the day of the bris, which is V'Tchilas Nefesh, Knisas Nefesh U'Akdoisha Shal Nasi B'Yisrael, the day of the bris, the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, is the beginning of the entrance of this holy soul, and in this case, it's the holy soul of the leader amongst Yidden. He davke bas cholas bein hamitzarim, specifically during the 3 weeks, at the beginning of the 3 weeks. Shleimus Yom Haledes Shloi, which the bris is like the conclusion and the completion of his birthday, B'Yud Beis Tammuz, that took place on the 12th of Tammuz. Hareze mevate begolui, this expresses in a revealed way, the bris of the Frierdiker Rebbe expresses in a revealed way as hatoichen hapnimi v'amiti, the true content and the true and the inner meaning and content shel bein hamitzarim of the days that are the 3 weeks. Hasimcha v'aliyah hagedol shebezeh, the great joy and the great elevation. Ad la'ofen shel yisron ha'orim min ha'choshech, until the manner of the extra light that comes about out of the darkness. Specifically during the 3 weeks, during the days of sadness, we make the great joy of a bris. This very day of the 19th of Tamuz gives us such a power to be able to have greater energy and greater power to reveal the great advantage that's in all the rest of the days of the 3 weeks. Similar to the idea that Hashem preceded the healing to the affliction in the Shabbosim that's between the 3 weeks. It gives us the energy to reveal the true meaning, the true idea of the 3 weeks. So if so, why now? Why, after so many thousands of years of having the sadness of the 3 weeks, do we merit now, only the last the last century or so, a little bit more than a century, are we zoiche to this simcha? Yes, we could say this idea, this quality and ascent of the 19th of Tammuz, this gala beikar b'doros achronim, was primarily revealed in the latter generations. Why that's so? Ki oz yesh me'enu te'ima magula asidu, because in the latter generations there is similar to and a taste of the future redemption. Koilel ha'inyan shalad hargoshes pnimius ha'toiv shebein hamitzarim, including also the feeling of the inner goodness of the days of the 3 weeks, ad lekoyach legalis zois bepoyel, until the power of revealing this in actuality. And this, it's very interesting that he brings over here in the footnote that when there was the Shalom Zacher of the Frierdiker Rebbe on Shabbos Parshas Bolok, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash, the Frierdiker Rebbe Zayda, was very, very happy. And the same thing during the Bris, he was extremely happy. That year, Shabbos Parshas Bolok was Shivasar B'Tammuz, but it was a nitche, it was pushed off for Sunday. And then he said, halavai, it should be pushed off truly. In other words, that by the time we're finished Shabbos, Mashiach will come and it'll be completely pushed off. But the words of a Rebbe is everlasting. So we see already built into the first celebration of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Bris, how is already built in a great rejoicing, a great happiness, beginning from the Shalom Zachar, which was on the night of Shavasar B'Tamuz, even though it wasn't a fast day because it was Shabbos, going into the idea of being pushed away because it came on Shabbos, and the great Simcha that was by the actual Bris. The Rebbe also mentioned that the entering of the neshama of a yid comes in different stages, and there's the pnimius type of entering. This is the time of the bris, and therefore the yud beis Tamuz occurred before the 3 weeks, but the bris, which is the real entering of the neshama, took place during the 3 weeks. The Rebbe is talking about further. The Rebbe is going to speak about this idea of the parsha of the week, that year Yutas Tamuz came out on Shabbos, and also with Shabbos Parshas Pinchas. Let's skip over to the next paragraph, which is the last paragraph on the first column of the page. Ubefrat shezoi gam Shabbos Parshas Pinchas. That Shabbos Parshas Pinchas has also to do, and therefore the entire week that's the week of Pinchas, has to do Shabai Nimtzas Ba'Gosha Aliyah V'Yisrna Oir Metechachosha Shabai De'esavka. In the parsha is emphasized the ascent and the greater light that comes from the darkness through transforming the darkness. Through Pinchas nullifying the decree that took place at that time because of what happened at the end of Parshas Bolok. The Pinchas Gomer Heishav Chamosim Abnei Yisrael Bekanis Kinosi Besoichem V'loi Kilisi Gomer. Pinchas turned away my anger from upon the Yidden when he was jealous on my behalf amongst them, and I did not destroy. And then there was the ascent that was caused and came about through it. L'chein Emer, therefore say, Hineni noisen lois brisi shalom. Behold, I am giving him my covenant of peace, bris kunas oilom, a covenant of an everlasting kahuna. Ilu shaloi hoyel lefnei yirida. Here's another example of an advantage and a quality that was not there before the descent. Pinchas did not have the quality of being a kohen, and now through this he attained the level of kahuna. Simcha through that he caused a great rejoicing above. Like a person that is appreciative and happy and kind and shows favor to someone that did him a favor. So to Hashem is showing his appreciation and his thankfulness and for the one that did on his behalf for Pinchas. This is also one of the reasons why the Chazal say that Pinchas, that's Eliyahu Navi, the one that will be to tell us about the coming of the Geula. It says that Eliyahu Navi is going to come to make peace between Hashem and the Yidden, or between Yidden themselves. That Eliyahu Navi will come to turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children, and turn the hearts of the children back to their fathers. A similar vein, we find a similar theme, in the continuation of the parsha, concerning the count of the Yidden, because of their specialness and love, that how he loves them, in such a way that the greater light comes out of the darkness, after the plague, that many Yidden passed away. That's when Hashem showed his love for them, that he loves them so much, he needs to count them. And another aspect that showed an idea of joy, afterwards the daily karbonos and the karbonos that are offered on Shabbos Yom Tovim, that those are matters of joy. Karbonos b'nischeyam, the karbonos were brought with their wine libations, shein simcha l'bayayin, because all joy is only when you have wine with them. That's why they had to pour the wine over the karbonos, which had to do with the wine that has to do with joy. The Rebbe also brings the idea that the studying about Parshas Tamuz and Karbonis is to repair another idea that had to do with the 3 weeks, because during the 3 weeks, one of the things that occurred on the 17th of Tamuz was they ceased bringing the carbon tummy. They didn't have any more sheep to bring. There's a whole story. They sent up something else instead of a sheep. So this is all by learning about the carbon tummy and the carbonis in general. We are repairing that and undoing the not bringing of the carbonis. And wine is something that's a sameach, elikim, va'anoshim. It makes rejoice both gods and men. So he says, let me see. Okay, let's go on one more paragraph over here, and I will skip over. Gili Amayla Shebein HaMitzarim, the revelation of the advantage of the 3 weeks, Hamisbatas B'Yem Abris B'Yutes Tammuz, that's expressed in the day of Abris on the 19th of Tammuz. Mudgeshes Ad Yoser B'Bris Shel Kvoitis Meirachami Admur B'Myuchad is emphasized even more so, specifically in the Bris of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Kimrumas B'Shem Shnitloi B'Yoyim B'Shas Abris, that's hinted in the name that was given to him on the day and during the Bris, which is essentially Yosef, which is increase, Yitzchak, which is happiness and joy. The Rebbe is going to talk some more about it later on in the Sicha. We're not going to get to that. By first prefacing the question, after the above mentioned explanation, in the great quality of the additional light that comes out of the darkness, that comes specifically through the 3 weeks. Still remains a general question. Why did Hashem do this? That the great advantage comes specifically out of the darkness. Embassy, it's true. It's true that Hashem wanted this to come about through the service of the Yidden. The ultimate and the power of the avodah comes to a revealed state through the concealment and the covering. Based to overcome the darkness, like we said before, in his base. But Hashem could have done it a different way. Hashem could have done this in a different manner, without concealment and covering and suffering. And alongside with this, there'll be about the advantage of the world, the advantage of a service of a person. The Rebbe speaks about what it says in Pirkei Avos at the end of the chapter, the end of the whole Pirkei Avos, that everything Hashem created in this world, He only created for His glory, and the whole part of the Perek Vav speaks about Torah. What is Torah and the world have a connection with each other? What significance does the world have to Torah? So skip over to the top of the second column. We could say the point of the explanation on this: the perfection of Torah, the perfection of the void of the Yidden. Only when it's felt and visible. They only created for His glory. Ein kavod ala Torah. Only it's Torah. Only the Torah is His glory. Gam ba'olam lashon helm v'hester. Even in the world, that the word olam in Hebrew means concealment. B'meitzarim v'gvulim shel olam, in the constrictions, constraints, and boundaries of the world. Ad la'olam hazar tachten shein tachten lamata menu, until this low world that there's nothing lower than it. V'sham gufa b'bein hamitzarim, and that this itself between the straits, and the darkness of the exile, then becomes the true unity of Yidden and the Torah and Hashem entirely one. All that remains is only something that Hashem's oneness is felt. It comes on even in the world, in the darkness, ad betachten, until what's down below that there's nothing beneath it.